My sister had me thrown out of her restaurant in front of everyone, called me a nobody, told security to drag me out, and smiled while it happened. What she didn't know. I was there because I was about to buy that restaurant for $2 million. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That night is burned into my memory with a clarity I wish I could forget. I remember the clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation, and how quickly the air changed when she noticed me. Faces turned. Voices dropped. I stood there, frozen, trying to understand how a simple visit became a public spectacle. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't asked for anything. Still, her words cut deeper than any scene she created. Each accusation landed like proof that whatever bond we once shared had already been broken long before that moment. The worst part wasn't being escorted outside, it was realizing how easily I was dismissed, as if my presence alone was an inconvenience she needed erased. As the door closed behind me, the noise inside continued, unaware that everything had already shifted. I took a breath, steady and slow, letting the sting settle. What no one inside could see was how calm I felt beneath the humiliation. Plans don't always look powerful from the outside. Sometimes they look like silence, restraint, and walking away without explaining yourself. I left that place knowing something irreversible had just happened. Not because of the scene she caused, but because of what it revealed. Some betrayals don't scream. They simply confirm what you've suspected all along, and once you see it clearly, there's no unseeing it. I've never been the kind of person people notice when I walk into a room. I speak when necessary, listen more than I talk, and prefer staying in the background. Attention always made me uncomfortable, so I learned to live without it. My name is Bryn Hale, and for most of my life, I existed in the shadow of someone who thrived on being seen. Mara, my sibling, was the opposite of me in every way. She commanded space without trying. Relatives leaned in when she spoke. Teachers remembered her laughter long after the bell rang. Wherever we went, eyes followed her, and admiration came easily. Standing next to her felt like standing beside a spotlight that never turned off. Growing up, our household revolved around her energy. Compliments flowed freely toward her confidence and personality, while my efforts were met with silence or quick nods. If I achieved something, it was expected. If she did, it was celebrated. I learned quickly that hard work didn't earn applause, it only kept me from being criticized. Instead of competing for validation I knew I wouldn't receive, I adapted. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped asking for recognition. I focused inward, developing patience and control. While praise lifted her higher, neglect sharpened me. I built resilience in quiet moments no one paid attention to. That imbalance shaped everything I became. I didn't chase approval or rely on encouragement. I trusted results, not opinions. Over time, I realized that being underestimated gave me something powerful: freedom. No one watched closely. No one questioned my choices. No one imagined what I was capable of building when left alone. By the time adulthood arrived, the pattern felt familiar. She continued being admired. I continued moving forward without noise. I didn't resent it anymore. Silence became my advantage, and discipline replaced validation. While others talked about potential, I focused on outcomes. I learned early that success doesn't need an audience, only persistence. When she announced her newest venture, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. A dining spot took shape under her direction, polished and loud in personality, mirroring its creator. Relatives spoke about courage and ambition as if they were inventions no one else had ever mastered. Toasts were raised. Stories were told. Her achievement became the centerpiece of every gathering. What most of them didn't see were the quiet foundations laid long before the doors ever opened. In the earliest stages, when uncertainty outweighed confidence, I stepped in privately. No contracts. No announcements. Just trust and a transfer meant to help stabilize things when banks hesitated. I didn't expect applause. I did expect respect. That never came. As months passed, conversations shifted. Gratitude never surfaced. Instead, my involvement was rewritten as obligation, as though being related meant automatic sacrifice without acknowledgement. During one tense exchange, she made it clear she believed encouragement was a debt I owed, not a choice I offered. The implication stung more than outright rejection. From that moment, distance settled in. Phone calls became shorter. Invitations stopped arriving. Any attempt at discussion was brushed aside with impatience, as if my presence reminded her of something inconvenient. I recognized the pattern instantly: contribution minimized, boundaries ignored. The space between us grew colder with time. What had once been quiet tolerance turned into guarded restraint. I stopped offering help. She stopped pretending it mattered. The unspoken understanding was clear: my role was expected, not valued. That divide wasn't created overnight. It formed through assumptions, entitlement, and the belief that success erased debts. By the time resentment surfaced openly, the connection we once shared had already thinned beyond repair. What remained wasn't anger, it was clarity. Leaving town wasn't dramatic. There were no goodbyes worth mentioning, no speeches or promises to stay in touch. I packed what fit in my car and drove until the scenery changed and the weight I'd been carrying began to lift. Distance gave me space to think, and for the first time, my decisions weren't filtered through anyone else's expectations. I immersed myself in work that required patience rather than charisma. I studied financial patterns, operational failures, and the small mistakes that quietly sink promising ventures. Over time, I began stepping in where others walked away, restoring stability instead of chasing headlines. The work suited me: methodical, precise, and invisible to most people. Ownership rarely carried my name. I preferred structures that kept identities out of focus and results front and center. Businesses reopened, payrolls stabilized, and communities kept familiar places without knowing who had intervened. That anonymity wasn't accidental. It allowed me to move freely, unaffected by assumptions or past labels. Income accumulated steadily, but nothing about my routine suggested excess. I rented modest spaces, drove older models, and avoided anything that drew attention. Comfort mattered more than display. I valued control and independence, not recognition. While others equated achievement with visibility, I measured it through consistency. Each successful turnaround reinforced what I'd learned growing up: progress doesn't need witnesses. Silence offers protection. Underestimation creates opportunity. Years passed without anyone connecting my absence to growth. That separation was intentional. I didn't want approval or reconciliation. I wanted autonomy. By the time my portfolio reached a level most would celebrate publicly, my habits remained unchanged. I blended into ordinary surroundings, content with privacy. What I built wasn't flashy, but it was solid. Every decision was calculated, every risk weighed. I trusted systems, not praise. Living simply kept my focus sharp and my options open. Success arrived quietly, just the way I preferred. The opportunity appeared quietly, tucked inside a private listing most people would overlook. Financial strain had begun tightening its grip, and operational cracks were no longer hidden. Numbers told a story pride refused to acknowledge. Poor oversight, mounting obligations, and careless expansion had pushed the establishment toward a corner with limited exits. When I reviewed the details, I didn't see failure. I noticed placement, a trained workforce, and a name that still carried weight with regulars. The foundation remained intact despite surface chaos. With the right structure, it could recover. With discipline, it could thrive again. That realization wasn't emotional, it was practical. Returning wasn't about reconnecting or settling old scores. It was business. Still, familiarity complicated things. I understood that stepping forward openly would invite conflict, assumptions, and unnecessary confrontation. History had taught me how quickly intentions could be twisted. Transparency, in this case, offered no advantage. Instead, I chose distance as strategy. A corporate entity handled inquiries, negotiations, and evaluations. My involvement stayed concealed behind paperwork and representatives whose only concern was feasibility. That separation kept conversations clean and decisions objective. Every step followed procedure. Offers were calculated. Risks were assessed. There was no rush, only precision. I didn't need to be present to understand what needed correction. Data spoke clearly enough. Coming back didn't mean re-entering old dynamics. It meant standing close without being seen, steering outcomes without becoming the subject. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about recognizing value where others saw embarrassment and acting before collapse became irreversible. The plan was simple: acquire quietly, rebuild deliberately, and let results speak on their own. Whatever history existed between us stayed irrelevant. At least, that was the intention. I stepped inside that evening without announcement or expectation. The purpose was observation, nothing more. I wanted to see how things functioned when no one felt watched. How orders moved, how staff communicated, how leadership showed itself under pressure. Blending in mattered more than comfort. I kept my appearance plain on purpose. No accessories, no signals of status. I chose a seat that offered a clear view without drawing interest. From there, I noted delays, tension in the kitchen doorway, small mistakes no one corrected. It confirmed what the paperwork already suggested. I hadn't planned on being noticed. Halfway through the meal, I felt the shift before I saw her. The atmosphere tightened, voices sharpened, movement stiffened. When our eyes met, recognition flashed, followed immediately by contempt. Whatever progress time had made dissolved in seconds. Her expression hardened into assumption. To her, my presence meant one thing: need. The narrative had already written itself in her mind. I was there for a handout, an apology, or attention I didn't deserve. She didn't ask. She didn't hesitate. The conclusion was instant. Years of buried bitterness surfaced without restraint. I could see it in the way she squared her shoulders, in the sharpness of her steps as she approached. There was no curiosity, no concern, only irritation fueled by old grievances never addressed. I stayed seated, calm, almost detached. The reaction confirmed everything I already understood about how she viewed me. Not as an equal. Not even as a person with agency. Just a reminder of something unresolved that she'd rather erase than confront. What surprised me wasn't her anger, it was how easily it returned. As if it had been waiting, dormant, for an excuse. That moment made it clear the distance between us hadn't softened anything. It had simply preserved resentment in perfect condition. The night hadn't been meant to matter. Yet in a matter of seconds, it shifted from routine assessment to personal collision. And once that door opened, there was no closing it quietly. Her voice cut through the room without warning, sharp and commanding, carrying farther than it needed to. Conversations nearby stalled mid-sentence. Utensils paused above plates. She didn't lower her tone or pull me aside. She wanted witnesses. Every sentence she threw at me was loaded with accusation. She painted me as resentful, as someone who couldn't stand watching another person succeed. According to her, I lingered on the edges of her life hoping to benefit from work I never contributed to. Each word was delivered with certainty, as if repetition had turned belief into fact. Employees froze where they stood. Some looked confused, others uncomfortable, but none intervened. She made sure they understood her position clearly, announcing that blood meant nothing within those walls. Whatever connection existed outside ended at the entrance. That declaration wasn't just for me, it was a warning to everyone listening. I didn't respond. Not because I lacked words, but because the situation had moved beyond dialogue. She wasn't searching for truth or resolution. She was asserting dominance, reclaiming control through embarrassment. With a brief gesture, she summoned enforcement. They approached hesitantly, clearly unsure how things had escalated so quickly. Still, instructions were instructions. One asked me to stand. Another avoided eye contact entirely. As I was guided forward, silence followed like a heavy fog. Strangers watched openly now, curiosity replacing appetite. Some expressions carried pity, others judgment, but all of them lingered longer than comfort allowed. The walk felt endless, every step echoing with finality. At the threshold, I felt the weight of her satisfaction behind me. She didn't need to say anything else. The message had been delivered. Thoroughly. Outside, the noise faded as the door shut. I stood still for a moment, steadying myself. What had just happened wasn't an argument, it was a performance. One designed to remind me exactly where she believed I belonged. I took a breath and walked away, knowing the scene would replay in her favor for now. But public moments don't define outcomes. They only reveal character. Just before I crossed the threshold, she leaned close enough that only I could hear her. Her tone dropped, stripped of performance, carrying something colder than anger. What she said wasn't loud, but it landed heavier than everything before it. It wasn't meant to wound in public, it was meant to define me in private. There was certainty in her voice, the kind that comes from years of believing your version of the story is the only one that matters. To her, this moment was proof, confirmation that she had always been right about me. Inferior. Out of place. Unworthy of standing anywhere near what she believed she had built. I felt the sting, but it didn't unravel me. Instead, it clarified something I hadn't fully accepted until then. No explanation would change her perspective. No reminder of shared history would soften it. She wasn't mistaken, she was committed to misunderstanding. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't defend myself. There was no anger left to fuel an argument, no desire to correct her narrative. Engaging would have given weight to words that didn't deserve it. My response was brief, almost dismissive in its simplicity. One word, calm and final. It wasn't agreement, it was closure. Then I turned away. Each step carried relief rather than regret. The air outside felt lighter, as if leaving also meant shedding something I'd carried far too long. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth revisiting. Walking away wasn't surrender. It was selection. I chose not to stay where I was defined by someone else's limitations. That moment didn't diminish me, it released me. And while she believed she had ended something, she had unknowingly marked a beginning I no longer needed to explain. The following morning, I arrived early, before anyone else had settled into their routines. The building felt different in the soft light, almost ordinary, as if yesterday's chaos had never happened. Inside, I moved with purpose, focused entirely on the task at hand. Documents lay neatly prepared, waiting for signatures. Each page outlined terms, contingencies, and responsibilities. Every clause had been reviewed, every detail double-checked. There was no room for error, and I wanted certainty before stepping fully into control. The final number, agreed upon after careful evaluation, confirmed the acquisition. $2 million, exchanged cleanly, marking a definitive shift in authority. No dramatics, no announcements, just calculated completion. Staff arrived, unaware of the formalities already concluded. Their routines continued uninterrupted, their positions secure. Retaining them wasn't just practical, it was essential. Familiarity and competence would stabilize what had been unstable, and continuity mattered more than ego. When the final signature went through, ownership changed hands silently. No celebration, no confrontation. Only a subtle acknowledgement, and the records reflected the transfer. The building, the brand, the staff, all officially under my direction now. Quietly, efficiently, the foundation for what would come next was in place. By mid-morning, Mara sensed something was off. She summoned the staff abruptly, urgency in her voice, claiming there were important updates that couldn't wait. Hushed conversations spread as employees gathered, curiosity mixed with unease. The moment I entered, the room froze. I wasn't alone, 2 attorneys followed, carrying folders that immediately drew attention. Mara's confident posture faltered as her eyes met mine. Recognition turned quickly into disbelief. One by one, the documents were opened and reviewed. Legal declarations, signatures, and official notices made it unmistakably clear, control had shifted entirely. I was listed as the sole proprietor. Authority that she had assumed to be hers was now formally mine. Gasps escaped from a few employees, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Mara's face betrayed the first signs of panic, a flicker of disbelief shadowing her usual composure. Words failed her, the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Silence dominated. Every heartbeat echoed in the quiet space. The shift wasn't subtle, and the impact settled like weight in the chest. For the first time, the staff witnessed the full extent of a reality Mara had never expected. In that stillness, the room understood what had changed. And Mara, for the first time, saw the consequences of assuming control was permanent. Mara's composure shattered almost instantly. Her voice rose, sharp and frantic, laced with disbelief and anger. She stepped forward, pointing fingers and listing grievances, each one dripping with accusation. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded, her words ricocheting off the walls. I remained still, measured, unshaken. The tension in the room thickened around her outburst, but I let it pass over me like water. There was no rush to defend, no temptation to yell back. Calmness carried its own weight, and I intended to let it speak louder than any protest. When the moment allowed, I spoke, my tone steady. I reminded her of the early support she had received, the financial help she never acknowledged, the times I had stepped in quietly when no one else would. I named the sharp words, the public ridicule, the moments she had humiliated me without pause. Everything she had assumed about me being weak or dependent was now in stark contrast to reality. Her glare intensified, but I didn't waver. I delivered the truth plainly. "I didn't take this from you. You ran it into my hands." The statement lingered in the air, unyielding and precise. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't gloating. It was clarity. For the first time, she couldn't spin the story to fit her assumptions. Ownership wasn't a gift, nor was it a ploy, it was the inevitable outcome of her own choices. The confrontation left space between us that wasn't about anger anymore, it was about recognition. She finally had to see that her actions had consequences, and I didn't need to raise my voice for that lesson to land. Decisions followed swiftly after the confrontation. Mara's involvement in daily operations ended immediately. She received a severance package that reflected fairness but also made it clear her authority had concluded. There was no room for negotiation, and the finality of the arrangement left no ambiguity. Attention then turned to the team. Procedures were clarified, responsibilities reassigned, and expectations communicated with transparency. Staff members felt the shift, but instead of fear or uncertainty, they experienced support. Guidance replaced tension, and consistency replaced chaos. Changes extended beyond personnel. The restaurant itself underwent subtle but meaningful transformation. Signage, interior touches, and operational systems were refined to reflect a renewed vision. Traditions that encouraged respect, teamwork, and accountability replaced habits that had allowed disorder to take root. The culture evolved quietly yet effectively. Meetings became constructive rather than performative. Suggestions were welcomed, mistakes addressed with coaching rather than blame, and morale began to rise steadily. Customers noticed the difference too, service improved, staff appeared confident, and the atmosphere felt purposeful. In every corner of the business, the consequences of past mismanagement were corrected. The foundation stabilized. What had once been a space defined by conflict was now a place of structure, respect, and clarity. The shifts were deliberate, lasting, and entirely beyond Mara's influence. Months passed, and the restaurant began to hum with purpose. Operations ran smoothly, staff moved with confidence, and customers returned, drawn by an energy that had been missing for years. Every small improvement reflected careful planning, patience, and attention to detail rather than showmanship. I never announced my role or recounted the story to anyone. There was no public celebration, no need to claim credit aloud. The results spoke quietly but unmistakably, and the transformation itself became the evidence of what had changed. Gradually, family members noticed the shift. Comments that once praised only Mara now acknowledged the improvements, the order, and the renewed success. Recognition arrived not as applause, but as understanding. They could no longer ignore the reality of what had occurred. I observed it all without interference. There was satisfaction in seeing the truth settle naturally, in knowing that the lesson was absorbed without confrontation. Time had validated the choices, and outcomes had spoken louder than any argument ever could. I realized then that revenge rarely requires drama. It isn't about spectacle or loud declarations. True resolution can be quiet, methodical, and thorough, delivered through patience, persistence, and the simple act of letting results reveal the story. That quiet victory was complete. Hey besties! Thanks for sticking with me through this intense journey. Imagine supporting someone silently for years, only to be humiliated when you show up to help. The sting of betrayal can cut deep, but it can also ignite a quiet strength you never realized you had. Seeing patience and persistence pay off, without drama, is its own reward. If this story touched you, like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.